George, what's up, man?
Whew, busy day. All good, thank you. How are you, Jason?
I'm good. I'm good. What time is it over there anyway?
I'm actually in Tampa. It's so
Oh,
it's I guess the same as you. Are you East Coast or West
yeah.
Coast?
No, I'm East Coast too. For some reason, I thought you were outside of the states.
Yeah, usually this would be my lunch hour where I'm out getting a tan, but this is much better.
That works. That works. Well, thanks for coming on with us. Excited for the chat. Before we jump into it, though, give a quick intro to the audience.
Yeah, sure. So, currently head of growth and strategy at Selligence. So, Selligence is an autonomous predictive intelligence tool used predominantly by sales teams and recruitment teams to essentially streamline prospecting. So, aggregating the world's data to look for about 116 triggers that we've seen in the past to lead to future headcount growth or future spend within organizations, partnering that with contact details of decision makers usually, just to really help streamline that entire process and help really response rates and close rates as a whole.
That's awesome. And yeah, if you're in a growth role, then you're close to my heart. We're going to get along great. Um, So yeah, I mean, obviously, we're dealing with a lot of macro elements right now. It's a tough market, arguably intense signaling, and being able to really get to those right accounts, those right targets at the right time is more important than ever. And a lot of cases becoming absolutely critical. But the big piece that a lot of organizations miss within this is focusing almost exclusively and myopically on net new logos, net new revenue. When at the end of the day, NRR, finding opportunities for expansion, for renewal, stuff like that, will actually move the needle typically better than focusing on net new logos. And as a growth person, how much time, effort, energy, money goes into bringing in those net new versus trying to just take care of and keep those existing customers happy, and especially finding opportunities for upsell, cross sell, stuff like that. So talk to me a little bit about what you guys are doing internally, as well as what your customers are doing around these things relative to the environment right now.
Yeah, I think it's a well-timed conversation because we know average contract values are down. I think about 20% quarter on quarter at the moment. We know that net new sales processes are lengthening with far more steps, far more stakeholders, more due diligence. Um, and I know our company was probably partially doing this at the start. Often the lens can just be focused on casting as wide a web as possible, really broad ICP, and just trying to bring on as many new clients as possible, which can seem really attractive at the time. But I think now it's really important to heavily define that ICP and then spend a lot of time and attention on those existing clients because your chances of retaining and growing an existing client are about 40 to 60% more likely than selling to a new one. We also know, as you say, it's a lot more expensive to bring on a new client and often a lot more time consuming. So my role, has pivoted a bit over the last few years. I started off in pure net new. I stepped in to head up the customer success team for about a year, which gave me really good insight as to some of the gaps we had when looking at sales against our customer success processes. And the experience of both of those has enabled me to go into this head of growth position, which is mainly just leveraging these existing relationships that we have, and obviously trying to further monetize them through upselling, cross-selling, as you say. And a big part of that's also been winning back previous clients who are maybe brought on at the wrong time. So for us, I mean, I guess to go into some more specifics, it's really just ensuring that client journey is as smooth as possible. It's ensuring that our CS team become trusted advisors to that organization, that the messaging is very clear from pre-sales process right through to their kickoff and onboarding calls. That first 30 to 60 days is really essential for us to ensuring that the platform is embedded and adopted as effectively as possible. And what that then enables me to do is join these slightly more strategic conversations, usually more at the stakeholder level, where we're reviewing maybe the goals and metrics that we set out to achieve at the start of a relationship. And obviously if we're holding people accountable, if they're telling us goals that they want to achieve and they've achieved them, really there should be no reason for that account to grow because they're only going to increase their ROI. So there is definitely some more specifics, I'm sure we'll go into. But I think having that cross-departmental unity in terms of what is our messaging, what problems are we trying to solve, and making sure that we're tracking them very closely and making sure that the clients can also see those metrics is going to be some of the bigger factors in ensuring that they continue to grow and retain as a client.
Could not agree more. And I mean, these are lessons I learned absolutely the hard way with my first B2B SaaS company that I worked with. I was running, marketing growth there. And we hit that, point that's a death knell for most SaaS companies where churn outpaced net new revenue. And ultimately that was what drove me to leave the company was, I couldn't get us to focus on the shoring up the app and the experience for the customers so that we would staunch some of that bleeding. And we were chasing that net new shiny object all the time, and we started layering pieces of tech on top of unstable pieces, and then you get 5 6 layers deep, and you go to fix the stuff, and then you break everything that's on top of it. And so it was a nightmare of a scenario, and played out about the way that you would expect it to. I mean, most SaaS companies that ever get to that point don't recover from it. But even if you're not there, obviously, it's a huge opportunity for supercharging your revenue and growth. And at a time like this, it's not really an option that you can ignore. You mentioned one thing in there that was really interesting. Bringing back customers that you lost. That's of course really hard to do for most companies, most products. So, how are you guys accomplishing that primarily?
Yeah, so it's something I'd say sort of midway through last year, we hadn't even really considered, to be honest. I don't think we brought back one client. And then began to realize that so many of our clients had churned in the early years because the product just wasn't obviously as developed as it is now. We're bringing in new products and features as a lot of SaaS businesses are every single month, sometimes more regularly than that. um, and I think really it was going back and fully understanding, and I think this is crucial, understanding obviously the main reasons behind churn in the first place. Because often, we can put it on a few different factors. Maybe they just say it was down to price, maybe it was the economic conditions. Much like a net new process, there's a lot of excuses which aren't actually the real reason that they didn't continue. um, so we've brought in a bit of a process whereby we'll either do an exit interview or at least a survey to understand their reasons. Was the onboarding up to standard with the expectations met? Where was the gap? We're presuming there must have been some gap in between expectations and reality. Um, and everything else to do with product experience, customer experience, so that really then we can begin to build out playbooks around those different reasons for leaving. So let's take, probably a pretty common one of moving to a competitor. Often it's just going to be the grass is greener. They want to try out something new. Not necessarily that your product hasn't met expectations, but we only have so much budget and it needs to be spent in some area. So we'd initially be hoping to understand what is it that you're hoping that they will provide you that we can't, and then obviously understanding when that renewal is, whether it's 6 months down the line, 12 months down the line, 24 months down the line, and at least getting a meeting in the diary for that point. And also in the meantime, keeping them updated with product updates, with case studies of similar organizations who have obviously had wins, who have achieved goals that they were actually brought on board to achieve. So you're keeping that relationship warm and consultative. And then there's everything else from maybe it was just a product, a feature that they were awaiting, which has now gone live 6 months down the line. Maybe it was integrating with their CRM system. Maybe it was that they were in a self-serve type model and they really needed hand-holding throughout the process. So maybe as their company is growing, we can look to put them on a slightly larger tiered system and get it properly embedded within their company. Because I think for us, in our product, we are going to have to spend a little bit of time getting it properly embedded and making sure it's habitualized in that first sort of 30, 60 days, as I mentioned. And if it's not, then that could, lead to some problems further down the line with a lack of adoption. But as we learn, what it takes to get people properly firing on the platform and getting successes, we can obviously bring that to them and say, whether it's introducing a short trial period or even maybe more of a limited version, just essentially restarting those conversations, hopefully rebuilding the trust because the trust may have been lost slightly. And we actually brought back over 20 clients in Q4 of last year, and we've still got them all retained and on board, and actually off a lot of them were actually at a higher subscription level than they were on previously.
Impressive. Congratulations on that. Um, and I mean that highlights another point to it that I've run into, increasingly in talking to people like yourself, where a lot of the problem with churn for these organizations came from that growth at all costs mindset. So going so aggressively and adding net new logos to it, even when it may not have necessarily been a fit. And so whenever you bring somebody on like that as a customer, then the ship's largely sailed most of the time.
Mhm.
Because unless it's like a very a feature that comes out not long after they're onboarded, or you find a way to solve for a use case, like the ship's largely sailed in that scenario. And then there's nothing you really do from a churn or retention standpoint whenever you do that. And so I think it highlights kind of how we set the stage and sort of got ourselves into a lot of the issues that we're dealing with right now. Obviously, all of this stuff, to be able to execute against it and do it well, requires a lot of coordination across different teams, different roles, stuff like that. You've got handoffs between different ones. You've got overlap between, success, support, depending on where you situate, upsells, cross sells, whether it's on the sales side, the CS side, whatever. How do you guys tackle that complexity?
Yeah, it's particularly in a, and I have caveated with this, it is often within a startup, because you may not have, the project managers or the sales engineers that maybe some enterprise companies can utilize in the process. Um, so yeah, to I guess take it back to the pre-sales process, we'd really like to keep sales involved when it comes to that kickoff call. So what we like to do is, after that point of sale, we have a kickoff call with someone from our CS team who's going to be managing that account, maybe our onboarder if it's going to be a larger client, as well as the salesperson, and then obviously any stakeholders from their side. And it's just making sure that we're still aligned on the pain points and goals that we discussed in the sales process. The CS individual is then going to be making sure that what is it going to take for us to achieve these goals based upon my experience in managing accounts and people similar to yourselves. I'm going to suggest that you do 50 emails from a platform a week, or put this into a 12-step cadence, or have a workflow of using this for 1 hour every single morning, integrating it into your CRM, and from that you should expect to see XYZ. And it means you're holding the client accountable and ourselves accountable to achieve these metrics. And if a user isn't playing ball, then we can reach out to those stakeholders and say, listen, what are we going to do? For us, we want all seats to be fully utilized, because we're on a seat based model, and we're not going to get any additional seats if one or two people just aren't engaged with the platform. So that synergy between sales and CS, and then myself sitting on that call, is pretty key, because I'm looking to take that conversation one step further, not just understanding what would deem it a success and enough to retain you as a client, but a lot of clients in, again, today's climate, are coming on board with maybe a land and expand approach. We're going to go for a smaller package, or maybe just give it to one office, to one team, build out a business case from there. So I really want to understand what are these big metrics that we want to aim towards, that would enable your CFO or your COO, whoever it's going to be, to easily make the decision to grow this account moving forward, once we've hit the desired goals. So those are a few things we're looking at throughout the client journey, and we'll be monitoring them on a quarterly business review, typically, again, with similar people involved. I think, if you're a real startup and you don't even have someone in a like growth position, or maybe quite a limited CS team who are doing a lot of tech support as well, you can definitely loop in the pre-sales, the account executives back into those QBRs as well, especially if they've got a good relationship with the stakeholders. By all means, you can definitely leverage that. We've done that quite a lot successfully. Um, and then just from a sort of product standpoint, the worst thing, and I think we've alluded to it, is promising a feature is going to go live, and then product aren't even aware of it, or tech aren't aware of it, and suddenly 3 months into the subscription, they're still awaiting this feature, which is pretty crucial to achieving these goals and metrics. Your chance of retaining or growing that client is probably just dropped by about 90%. So if it is a slightly more technical sell, maybe we're looking at API solutions or data-led models, that's definitely where I like to involve product or tech an early point as possible. So there's no confusion. They're on the same page. The promises are being, made upon, and everyone's on the same page, because we're not at a point where we have a project manager who would be putting it all together. So that could be someone like myself working between the different departments to make sure we can actually achieve the objectives that they've set out.
Sounds like you guys have done a hell of a job on that side of things. Are you guys leveraging any tech to enable this? Obviously, in our space, increasingly, companies have been leaning heavily on different solutions around, these CX roles. Are you guys using anything special within your tech stack relative to that? And if so, how are you leveraging those?
Yeah, so there's definitely, let's say a client's been brought on board, and they're a few months into their subscription. Um, there's definitely tools that we'll use to look for these triggers that indicate that they could be primed for an upsell or cross sell opportunity. I mean, hopefully we're gathering that from our organic conversations, but we use Vitally as a customer success CRM. We use Salesforce as our main CRM, but most of the health score tracking and metric tracking is done through that. And what we're looking at is, the core staple usage, how regularly are the people logging into the platform. For us, deep product actions are quite crucial as well, because a lot of people will use systems, but not necessarily in the way that we want them to. But if we see them revealing contact information, if we see them emailing through the platform or adding this data into their CRM, then that's a really good sign for us that they're obviously using the platform in the correct way. They're enjoying using the platform. And actually, on the quarterly business reviews, we'll try and tie in our reports from what we're seeing on our side, and ask the client, if they've got their own CRM system, to track the slightly more fine-tuned metrics of how many of our opportunities are actually making it into a deal stage, and what clear ROI are you receiving. So you're definitely using the likes of Vitally. We've also used, sales engagement tools such as, Outreach and Cloud Talk, within the customer success and growth team as well. And I think it's just as important for people in CS or growth to have those tools as it is for, sales individuals. I think sometimes they can be left behind slightly, but really we can set up playbooks with marketing as well, to make sure that every time we do see a win, or every time we do see 100% account utilization, every time we are seeing good feedback, positive sentiment on calls, that we're putting them into some form of playbook through one of these sales engagement tools. Whether it's just getting a champion at a slightly lower level and maybe including them on the next QBR to speak how highly of a product to their decision makers, or of course to the decision maker themselves. So yeah, there's a few bits of tech that we use, and obviously our own platform will typically be tracking our clients. Just to flag it, it's very good for myself to track our clients and see, when have they just appointed someone new, have they just opened up a new office, have they just been acquired. And sometimes it can actually be a bit of a threat to churn. Obviously, if someone's just been acquired, that could mess everything up. If one of your main stakeholders has just left a business, that could put everything in jeopardy. So it's really crucial to leverage that market information as well, to understand the state of play with your clients, and make informed decisions on that.
Well, hats off to you, because it sounds like you understand the tools are just that, a tool. I see way too many organizations leaning too hard on these solutions as if it's going to solve the problems, as opposed to giving them signals and indications of where they need to focus. I'll never forget the first time that I played around with them. This is going way back early in my career. I made a really funny, interesting mistake within it. So it was like I got it spun up, and I was like, all right, first place we need to go focus on and reach out to are the people that are about to renew, and usage is like, and is tanked. I was like, we need to go get in front of these before they churn, and before renewal comes up. Turns out that was the worst thing I could have done, because 201, they almost every one of them canceled whenever we reached out to them. It was like, oh crap. And so like learned a really important lesson really early on relative to that. It was like, you got two key points whenever it comes to this, in my experience, that you've got to focus on. It's when you have a failed onboarding, and so they just never got up and going. And then it's when you find that they were successfully onboarded, they were going, and then you see it fall off. And in both cases, it is so critical to be right there on it, because if you let much time pass, you're basically back to the scenario of trying to bring on a lost customer. And we already talked about how hard that is to do. And so, it's really, really critical within that to do that. What are some of the signals that you look for relative to those two kind of, critical pieces within it?
Yeah, in terms of then becoming more of a churn threat.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, so it's yeah, I mean, I actually like to sort of I'm quite sort of anal in how I track everything. So even going back to win back, every single one of my clients I'd have been trying to bring back onto the platform would have been ranked 1 to 5. 5 is like a no go. They were non ICP to begin with, or they've gone bankrupt. There's just no way you're winning them back. And one is obviously primed to get back on board. It was maybe a bad decision on their part. Maybe we've massively expanded the platform in their market since. So I think everything should always be tiered and obviously prioritized. I'm not just going back to all clients to try and bring them back on board for the sake of it. It's really making sure that we're bringing back the clients who we should have never really lost in the first place. And it's the same for these churn risks. I mean, there's probably still always going to be the occasional client who comes on board who's maybe low value, maybe it's just not the best fit, and of course we're going to do whatever we can to try and make a success of it. But if we're seeing a big account, and maybe the onboarding's been slightly delayed, or maybe the integration's been slightly delayed for whatever reason, we know that those first, not even few days, I used to think, we've got a few weeks. Sometimes it's the first few hours on a product is going to make or break it for someone. If they're coming on and they've got a poor experience, we saw probably 3 or 4 years ago when we were building it out in beta mode, it's going to be very hard to rebuild that trust. Again, I think just coming down to trust in us as an advisor, trust in the platform as a product that can help them, particularly when they've already got tools in their tech stack that maybe do something similar, obviously not exactly the same. It's very easy to fall back on your existing methods. So I would definitely be looking for, any glitches, any annoyances, any tickets raised in those first sort of 30 or 60 days. And then we would be all over that as a customer success team. And I think actually startups and scale ups should really play on this, is like most companies I know of a smaller size are very big on giving you a lot of human time and sitting on calls with you and hand holding you and giving you so much strategic advice, being more than just someone training you on a platform, but actually taking it to that next level. So even if they're not getting immediate value out of a platform, can we suggest something with your current workflow that can be improved? If I'm talking to a decision maker and they're weighing up whether to expand into the US or Europe this year, can I give them statistics on our database to tell them that actually US is growing but Europe's dropping slightly, or a competitor of yours recently did this and it went really successfully? So trying to obviously build value outside of just a product, I think, is quite crucial where you are having maybe some of those product problems, because they're always going to happen. Um, and outside of that, triggers that could indicate churn, I think, drop off in usage is always going to be the main ones. Understanding why they've dropped off is obviously the crucial thing. But I do think, a trigger that I mentioned earlier, losing either a champion user or a key decision maker who's helped you to bring on the platform or manage that process internally is going to be pretty crucial. And it's why from the get go, from that first kickoff call, you should be trying to include as many stakeholders as possible. Can we get, if we're just talking with the chief revenue officer, can we also speak to the VP of marketing? Can we get the COO on board? Obviously, each are going to have their different goals and metrics. But at least then, if one person does leave a business or go on maternity leave, it's not going to put your deal, your upsell proposal or your renewal in jeopardy, because there's no one left in a business who actually understands the value of the product in the first place.
no, it's great. Um, So anytime that you're dealing with cross department things, you're dealing with this type of complexity. It's a challenge to get all of that aligned. You need to have some kind of leadership, some sort of guidance within that. Where does that reside for you guys, and where do you think it should generally reside within companies? So you've got obviously cross departmental functions and functionality there. Where does the guidance, where does the leadership of this come in? Is it, all the way to the top of the CEO, or do you guys have it focused within one department versus another?
Is that on the client side or on our
Yep.
side internally?
Well, for you, and then generally, if the case is that you guys, don't think the way you do it is the way that generally companies should be doing it, relative to whatever is specific to you guys. But how do you guys structure it, and how do you envision that it ideally should be structured?
Yeah, so I think for us, we're always going to try and involve as many people as possible in a lot of these conversations, as long as they can. We don't want to be wasting people's time, of course. I think we found that trying to eliminate as much of a CS responsibility as possible has been quite crucial, because we did have a lot of time again in the earlier years, CS having to deal with a lot of tech support that would typically sit under tech support, bug fixes, resolving issues, going through pretty painstaking basic workflows. So what we've built out on that side is more of a tech support team. Obviously, systems like intercom, where people can actually use support portals within the platform itself, can cut out so much time from a CS rep's day, where really it is tasks that they really shouldn't be focusing on. Um, trying to obviously bring in an account management or growth team, I think, as early as possible. And I think someone who is in a head of growth or head of account management role should really be spearheading the majority of strategy, should have probably the greatest knowledge of the entire portfolio. So, out of our few hundred clients, I should be able to name pretty much every one of them and have like a decent understanding of where they're at in their journey with us. And again, probably have tiered them on like, these guys need some help and hand holding. These are a little bit indifferent, and we need to do a bit more with them. And then these are our champions. These are ones who are giving us good G2 reviews, who are upselling, who are cross selling with us. So I do put a lot of responsibility on myself with that, as well as the director of customer success, who is probably going to be dealing with more of the renewal and retention conversations, and maybe more of that strategy when it comes to the likes of tech support, and improving health scores as a whole. And then I think it's no bad thing, especially in a smaller business, to be involving, your CEO, your founder, into a lot of these bigger QBRs to really resell the why behind the product, and where the company is going moving forward. We're in quite an exciting place in our product roadmap. We've got a lot of ideas moving forward, and I think it's quite easy for clients to actually forget why they came on board in the first place. Sometimes, you just get into that rhythm of using something, and often we're actually trying to change their workflows and habits entirely. And I think having someone at the C-suite come on, especially as ours is actually ex-industry and will have gone through a lot of the same pains as they've got, can explain why we built it in the first place. I think that can really resonate, and I think that can be very powerful. So really playing on as many people within the business as you can. And again, if it's going to be a slightly more technical conversation, that's where we'd usually be linking in a head of technology or a CTO, to discuss the specifics, as we're not at a place where we have the likes of sales engineers running those conversations. So it is going to be a bit of a hybrid, to be honest. There's quite a lot of flexibility in our company in terms of who can take the reins. But I would say the communication is always going to be paramount. We don't want to be giving mixed messaging. We want to be really treating it as a bit of a project, and discussing what's gonna work best. What don't we want to do with this client, and what have we seen in the past to lead to the most success, etc.
That's great. Um, I love that you have the understanding of sort of the classical definition of growth, which is it's cross functional and it works the entire funnel and it's trying to optimize across all of that. I feel like growth sort of got bucketed into demand gen in most people's minds, and they don't have that understanding of like, hey, the real goal of it is to understand what happens full cycle and optimize across that full cycle. And obviously that touches on all of those different roles and departments and leans heavily on customer success and NRR. Um, so pivot a little bit here. Personal question: how'd you wind up in growth roles to begin with?
Yeah, so I actually started. As a first client side employee at Selligence, I joined where it was me and maybe three or four techies, and we were working on this product to try and take it to market in beta mode. It was really exciting. I absolutely loved it, like how much control I could have in it straight out of university. And then gradually, as we obviously became to monetize, and began to sort of begin to bring on clients and really nail down increasingly our ICP, I moved into a pure like individual contributor sales role, which I absolutely loved. and went gradually into a sales manager role, and then actually went for a bit of a horizontal move, quite unexpectedly actually. But there was an opportunity for me to head up our customer success function about a year and a half ago. And my understanding of CS, having not worked in it, was their life must be a piece of cake. You know, we're bringing clients onto you. The product's only going to get better. The team's only going to grow bigger. You know, why? How couldn't they renew in 12 months' time? How couldn't you get upsells from them? And then actually, stepping into that role, because I was quite keen to broaden my understanding of a full life cycle of a client. I'd always wanted to stay involved in some of these bigger ticket clients that I brought on anyway. um, that's when I came to realize all the challenges that CS have in their day-to-day roles, some of which I've already alluded to. And then when we brought on a director of CS, a few months later, once I put in a few of the strategies I'd learned in sales into that customer success team, and we were beginning to see more traction with renewals and upsells and cross sells, and really marking that white space that we could attack a little bit more aggressively. Um, yeah, that was when our director of CS came in and enabled me to head up a growth function over here in Tampa. It's been a great move. Um, and yeah, the last sort of 7 or 8 months have really just been focused on that revenue maximization and bringing back clients across, our portfolio.
It's great. Uh, what's your take on why do you think so many organizations focus on the net new revenue side of things versus really focusing on retention, renewal, upselling, the NRR piece of it? Because I don't think anybody would debate that the vast majority focus on pouring more into the top of the funnel as opposed to plugging all the leaks on the other side of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it can sometimes seem more exciting and sexy to be bringing on all these big brands and big names. I love nothing more than closing a deal, seeing that contract signed, and then I think a lot of salespeople fall into the trap of just chucking them over your shoulder to CS and you're on to the next one. And particularly in today's market, where I think only about 40% of quotas across most AEs and businesses are being met, there's obviously a lot of pressure on those consultants to hit the targets, and it does sometimes lead to I think non-ICP clients being brought on board, or maybe just a mismatch of expectations set in the sales process against the reality. I think speaking with other businesses, that's definitely been the case. um, and it often does seem like the easiest way to obviously grow the ARR, if you're got a decent average deal size, average decent contract value, and you're expecting to bring in multiple of those clients a month, it can seem a little bit easier than obviously fixing the existing problems or growing the existing accounts that have got high potential. And I think sometimes that can take a little bit more time, to be honest, because as I say, they're probably not going to come on board and in 2 weeks they're going to have doubled their seat level or consumption model with us. It's going to take a little bit of time to earn that trust, to get it habitualized within the organization, to set up these metrics, which will obviously lead to them wanting to grow the account. And I think, to be honest, CS is often seen as secondary. It's often,
Absolutely.
I think a lot of people will fail a sales interview and they'll get put into CS, and it's just seen as a role where you just need to jump on a few calls, give a few trainings, and everything's going to be great. But CS, I think, is probably the most, having done all three, I think it's the most pivotal role in an organization, because you are so pivotal to that client success. And as I say, you need to be more than just someone training them on a product. You need to be making sure that they hit the goals, that you're advising them on areas outside of just your core product and platform, and that you are being that linchpin between different departments to make sure that tech are on board, and you're communicating that when it comes to product updates or bug fixes, to make sure that you're speaking with marketing in terms of doing account-based marketing and making sure our clients are all aligned and we can work on cross-sell opportunities together. So I think, to be honest, it's just probably a little bit harder to do a lot of this account growth. Some of it will come organically, and you'll get emails saying, "Can we add on 3 seats?" And it's great. A lot of the times, you're going to have to go into new offices. You're going to have to really prove a product and work across 6, 12 months to get it embedded across a wider organization. And sometimes, if your average deal length is 3 weeks, it's going to seem easier just to put all your resources in that side of the business.
Yeah, I think that complexity, sophistication versus the relative ease, or at least familiarity and comfort on the acquisition of net new, I would agree drives the bulk of this. It's my hope. It's probably a wild hope that what we're dealing with right now is going to cause a reset around a lot of these things. The reality is I'm seeing people just looking for different easy buttons more often than not. Obviously, you guys are not falling into that trap. Outside of focusing on NRR, what have you guys done to respond to the current market conditions?
Yeah, it's definitely caused, some challenges. I think most people from like a net new perspective are looking to come on board at smaller packages, limit their financial cost as much as possible. And we've been floating with, ideas around sort of freemium models. Previously we'd never really done trials or any freemium model of any kind, but to try and prove ourselves and build again that business case that can enable them to justify the investment. We're sort of dabbling in that market at the moment, and I think it is obviously with product led growth. It is definitely an avenue that a lot of companies are taking at the moment. Try and get that virality, try and get the whole business signed up on some form of limited version of your product, and have enough people within that company telling their manager that they have to have this on a slightly higher level. And I think that that may well be the way it goes moving forward. I know more and more buyers want a seller free experience. For the most part, I think that'll never really change at the enterprise level. I think you're always going to need, with the sophistication you mentioned, you're going to need a lot of different stakeholders involved in that process. But I think for some of these smaller deals, it can probably be done in a slightly more automated fashion on these freemium type subscriptions. And I think, having flexibility in price is always going to be a necessity. But we've also, looked at other avenues. What are our clients currently struggling with? And a lot of the time now, the priorities have changed. Obviously, from last year, growth at all costs. We want to just build out our tech stack as much as possible. If it gives us 2% ROI, more than we were receiving before, great. We're going to hire everyone we possibly can. And now it's obviously done a complete 180, and people are trying to reduce their tech stacks and streamline their headcount. And we do actually play into that market quite well, because we can often remove 3 or 4 tools in their tech stack and consolidate it into one. So it's actually changing our messaging, although it's pretty much the same product as last year. Whereas last year we're focusing on helping your growth goals and helping you book more meetings. It's now pivoted slightly towards, we've got market intelligence, we've got contact information, we've got vacancies and job postings, we've got the ability to email through the platform and integrate to your CRM. So although it may not have, in unison all the different bells of whistles of all of those different tools you're using, maybe you can cut out 30, 40, maybe more percent of your cost within the wider tech stack, and actually become a little bit more streamlined, if that's the main goal that you're looking to achieve. So I think, keeping an eye on the market and obviously doing as much research on companies and decision makers as you can to understand their goals and pain points, because obviously they're going to be subject to what the CFO wants a lot of the time. And then making sure that your marketing and your demos, and your conversations with clients, quarterly business reviews really reflect that. And that's often where we get the majority of our information, is just in a discovery part of demos and a pre-sale standpoint. QBRs, speaking to clients about their goals and objectives. What are they worried about in the market? What are their focuses? Are they confident that it's going to change in 6 months' time, or are they really cautious? And then consolidating that information and understanding, right, well, this is clearly where we're going to solve a pain in 6 months' time. This is where we can solve a pain now.
Yeah, I've seen a huge shift in attitude towards tech stack of moving from like, hey, we want best in class for each one of these things that we're trying to solve for, to does it do enough? Is it good enough? And can we consolidate around it? And that's been a dramatic shift over the last year or so, that I've seen. I imagine you guys have seen, given that your product is so flexible and provides so much intelligence, I imagine you guys have seen a shift in how your customers are utilizing, your platform. What have you seen on that side of things relative to them adapting to what's going on?
Yeah, for sure. I think it is now. often becoming more of an all-in-one solution, and it is going to depend on the size of a business. I think, if you're sub 100 headcount organizations, you probably don't have as complete or wide of a tech stack. They are really looking to do everything through Selligence, when it comes to new business, when it comes to account management, when it comes to customer success. Anything where you're really looking for triggers or contact data, they're often going to be doing through our tool. Now, I still think there's space for, where we're speaking to slightly more enterprise organizations, we're actually sometimes just feeding specific triggers into their CRM system. So they only want to know three types of acquisition or Series A funding rounds. And actually, they're just using us for a very, very specific user case. But they've also got other tools in their tech stack, maybe a Zoom Info, maybe a Seamless, whatever it may be, for gathering contact data. I still think there's definitely a case for us and probably companies out there to be very niche and specialized in what they do and really nail down, their USPs. Um, at the same time, I think sometimes the more you can do, the better. If you are going to save them cost and time spent in other tools, and I would say it's just going to depend on what teams you're working with. Is it going to be a system wide technology that the whole company has to use, or is it just going to be sat within a specific function? And obviously then the size of business as well, which may dictate that. But yeah, I'm not sure if you've seen any different.
Oh, we've seen it radically shift on, obviously here at RevGenius, where we're running the community, where we're selling, sponsorships, partnerships, stuff like that. We've seen a big shift to, focusing on short-term ROI, trying to do, pilot plans instead of like, hey, we're going to come and do a package of X, Y, Z. Like, how can we, take a small step here or sample there, whatever. And the challenge that I see in a lot of those things is that, and I'm seeing it on the what's going on the cost cutting side of things and stuff like that. A lot of it's kind of self defeating. So like the idea that you can come in and generate leads from a webinar and then pass them straight to a sales person, and that you're going to convert those straight off of like first engagement, first time they've had anything to do with you is they came and registered and watched a webinar. The idea that those are sales ready and that you're going to just pass it straight to that as that motion, it's just like, I've been there, I've done that. I learned those lessons very early in my career, a long time ago, and it's like that doesn't work. And it's similar stories with like, hey, we've got to cut costs, so let's decimate our go to market team. It's like, wait, what? Like, you still have to hit targets. You still got to grow revenue. You just cut three-quarters of your go-to-market team. It's just like the sort of myopic, short, sighted focus on things. You really wonder, like, how do these people think it all the way through whenever they're doing that? And that, we're having to do a lot on our side to sort of educate the market on, you've got to go and do these things the right way. And if you focus on that, then the results will follow. And you got to get, as a growth person, you're more than familiar with this. You've got to get comfortable with not having straight line attribution all the time. And makes a lot of people uncomfortable. It's like, well, we can't tell exactly what deals and revenue came from this. And it's like, well, you can correlate it at least. We saw this with one of our partners where it was like, if you looked at straight line, it was like, it was, there was ROI, but it was just barely better than break even. And then we went and looked at it. It was like, all right, what happened to your traffic to your demo page? What happened to your demo count? What happened to your opportunities? What happened to your revenue? It was like, oh, holy crap. Same time you started running this, all of these things like, 4 or 5x. It's like, okay, yeah. And it was like, okay, that ended and, it trailed off over like 30, 60 days. It's like correlation's pretty high there. So you can't say like exactly what deals happened. But it was focusing on like that engagement side of things. And I think a lot of what you're talking about on the CS, retention side of things is the same story. You've got to focus on doing those right things, knowing that, that the results are going to come from that. And I think the combination of it not being an easy button combined with not being able to say like, okay, what impact was that? How many of these accounts would have churned if we hadn't done XYZ? That's not easy to track. That's not easy to like sit there and say like definitively it would have gone this other way. And so I think those two aspects of it are probably, the biggest contributors to the lack of prioritization within it. I don't know if you would say the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think a point you alluded to there definitely hits home. When we've had clients in the past who don't have this integrated into their tech stack and it's more of a standalone platform, it can be hard to get that accurate and clear ROI. And sometimes it's just coming from speaking with the users and understanding, oh, I just made a placement or I just did a deal through Selligence. And gathering those wins is going to be so important in this particular climate. And a lot of despite them maybe saying that the partnership goal is to get a 10x ROI or to do X, Y, Z, often there are going to be a lot of smaller, slightly more hidden benefits as well. So for us, it might be that actually they've saved about 45 minutes in research and prospecting every single day. Maybe it's just they're building their personal brand and their company brand slightly better because they're not just reaching out to anyone and everyone in a spray and pray approach, but they're reaching out in a consultative fashion and they're, making well-timed introductions to people. So it's often trying to just make sure that the client's aware, decision makers are aware of all of these smaller benefits that come with your solution, as well as the headline placements or deals or whatever it may be that's been made. Um, and yeah, on to the second point there, when it's looking more from like a customer success perspective, I mean we've done a lot to try and really like diversify our messaging as much as possible. And I think the goal for us, moving forward is going to make sure that like each specific client has got their own messaging going to, not each specific client, but each segment of clientele, whether it's focusing on a particular industry, they're getting their own unique messaging to make sure that it's actually resonating with them. Because I think in the past we've done slightly generic, information and updates, but we want to make sure that we're really hitting home with these product updates, with these things that are going to really resonate with the clients that we're working with, whether that's on a freemium model looking to upgrade, whether that's a top tier enterprise client.
It's great. Where do you see things going over the next year or so as far as the evolution of this? Do you see more and more, focus on NRR and, customer success, or, do you see companies trying to double down sort of on the, let's we just got to go pour more into the top, and on the other side of that, like for the ones that are wanting to do that, obviously culture becomes a big piece of execution around this because, like we already touched on, it spreads across, really all departments, and you need alignment across all of those. You need all roles part of it. I would argue, and I'm sure you wouldn't, object too much as a growth person. It also takes a very data driven approach to it. And so, if you're at an organization where those are not currently, things that you're prioritizing and focusing on, but it's starting to become clear like that has to happen. Where do you begin in that transition process?
Yeah, so I think NRR and net new, like the focuses, the more I see, on LinkedIn, on these different channels, on these communities, it is really recognizing the importance of making sure. And I think for funding reasons as well, a lot of companies now will be looked at not just for ARR and how quickly it's grown, but it's their NRR and keeping gross churn below that 10%. And obviously having to figure out at some point, how do we do that if we're not already? Um, so I think the more repercussions, negative NRR has, the more repercussions high churn has, the more companies are just going to be forced to adapt. It's not even going to be a choice. It's going to be essential to the continuation of a business. Now, of course, that doesn't take away from the focus on net new. I just think and hope that that's going to become a little bit more targeted. We know, spray and pray is dying just because it's getting far fewer response rates, and people are really having to hit on specific pain points and goals of these businesses to get a conversation in the diary now. So yeah, I think net new is obviously going to change. I think it is going to be much more of a consultative journey, and I think there's always obviously going to be a place for it. But I think NRR, through retention, through account growth, through really maximizing every single client you have, whether that's building out new products for them, whether it's offering different solutions, or whether it is just trying to increase those headcounts using your tool as much as possible. And outbeating your competition, I think that's probably going to be the number one priority of a lot of companies moving forward. And I don't see that as being a bad thing, because it's bad for us if we lose a client, but it's also bad for the client. Like they've spent a lot of time trying to get this embedded. They've spent a lot of time working with their users, so it's obviously in everyone's best interest as soon as that contract is signed to make it a successful partnership across months and years to come. That's obviously going to be the best route forward. And growing that in a mutually beneficial way, so they're getting higher levels of ROI and we're getting more revenue, again, is going to be the preferred path forward. And then on the second point there, was it asking around sort of being data driven in decision making?
Yeah. I imagine that, leveraging data in driving and using that to drive the alignment across these different teams and what you're doing, it plays a significant role in your ability to execute across this.
Yeah, 100%. Health scores, and to be honest, we actually quite like to just involve our tech team just to listen in on a lot of client feedback calls as well, even if it's with a user, just so they can hear firsthand how they're getting on with the product, what's been working really well, what do they love, what obviously annoyances or frustrations, if they have any, do they have. So you've got that at more of a qualitative level. But then from a data-driven standpoint, looking at, let's say, usage stats and health scores, who's that feeding into? Obviously we're going to be using that for marketing campaigns, we're going to be using it for tech to see what segment of clients tend to actually have best traction with the platform, and probably be using that to then feed back into sales to say, right, these are the clients who are using it best and most proactively and getting the best results from it. This is probably a segment that we want to target moving forward, and probably as a growth team I want to prioritize as accounts that we can expand. And on the flip side of that, obviously, where we're having low usage, where we're having maybe a lack of ROI, um, is there anything distinctive about that client set? Are they lower headcount? Are they in a particular industry where there's less market intelligence? Um, or is it actually just a company who's quite happily to pull data on a quarterly basis and put it into a report, and they're more than happy to do that? So you've obviously got to take everything with a pinch of salt. And I think sometimes people can be too data driven. But looking into the reasons, as long as you know the reasons behind the data, I think that should really dictate everything from your go to market strategy to your renewal strategy to your growth and expansion strategy.
I'm curious, what did you have in mind whenever you said too data driven? I've
um
seen a lot of examples, but you seem like you had something in mind.
yeah, I think looking at, I take it back to like sales and looking at conversion ratios, especially over a short period of time. I don't think it's always going to be fully reflective of someone's ability necessarily. I think it can obviously fluctuate so much, and sometimes you can just lose a deal because of market conditions or a competitor. And I think people can sometimes change their habits or change their process on the back of 1 month of data, and suddenly they've stopped doing something that was actually working really well for them, but maybe that month they just had a dip. So I just think it's always important to look at it across 6 12 months, not just the last few weeks. Why haven't I closed a deal this month? Maybe need to double my prospecting efforts, and then suddenly the quality of your prospecting or your quality of your account management goes down. Um, and actually, when we're looking at the CS side, not always taking our own impression, or even my client's impression of why they churned at face value always, because they may just say it's down to cost. But actually, if they'd have generated a 10x ROI, then the cost is probably not going to be the factor that makes them leave the platform. It's going to be the fact that they haven't seen that value, the lack of perceived value. Um, so I think when we're doing these check boxes and we're looking at, every client who upsold this year was on a certain package, or every client who churned this year was because of this reason. Yes, that's a very good indicator, but again, there's often going to be deeper layers and some nuances within that.
Yeah. Excellent call out. If you're going to be data driven, know how to use the data. You can get into all kinds of trouble, and I mean, it's one of the most basic fallacies we have whenever we're being data driven is the law of large and small numbers. Like If you don't have a large enough sample size, you're as likely as not to pull the wrong result out of it, and that gets to be a very dangerous game. But another big piece of it that's been critical for me across my career has been, merging that qualitative with the quantitative.
Mm,
I see way too many focus on one at the absence of the other, and it's a two-way street, and you have to be constantly going back and forth on it. That qualitative informs what you're seeing in the data, but even more so, a lot of times that qualitative tells you what to go look for in the data, because a lot of times that doesn't jump right out at you. I mean, a lot of
mm,
people have a misconception of like, how do you do this relative to data? That like, you're gonna go look at it, and these things are gonna be like, oh, okay, that tells me something. It's like, no, you generally have to go look for it. It's been one of the big missed areas within AI, especially when it comes to data. Is like, hey, if we just feed it giant data sets with no instruction, like these amazing insights are going to fall out of it. It's like that almost never happens, and so you need that qualitative piece of it to be able to inform what you're doing there on the data side, vice versa. The data gives you context and insights on the qualitative side of what may be going on there, and are these one-offs that you shouldn't put too much weight on, or is that high quality qualitative data that gives you direction out of that. So great call out there
mm.
on that piece of it. um, so George, we're getting close to the end of our time here. Let me know what are kind of your priorities, both within your role as well as the organization here, over the next quarter or two, and where are you guys trying to take things?
Yeah, so when I stepped into that head of growth role, and I'd say any business who hasn't really looked at growth yet, there's probably going to be a lot of low hanging fruit. There's going to be clients who probably need extra seats they haven't even thought to ask. There's going to be clients who churned who are very easily won back because your product's developed, you've got a better team in place now, you've got a new feature for them, etc. So a lot of that increase across last year was relatively easily done. And that's always a good starting point. And I think now we're still getting that organic traffic in, but really for myself, it's focusing at more of the enterprise level, and where can we cross sell across our slightly more enterprise accounts, because they do take slightly longer, and we've began to see that traction really build across the last 4 or 5 months or so. But it's making sure that if we've got a company with 20,000 headcount or 200,000 headcount and multiple different offices, we're beginning to really spearhead the relationships in each one, and sometimes working from a bottom up approach just to get that traction and virality I spoke about earlier. Sometimes it's working from a top down and seeing if we can maybe do a slightly larger, slightly more technical subscription. And really just making sure that the clients know the value of the platform, even if that's not to get additional seats or to get maybe additional users in another office. It's really making sure that we're tracking the success that they are receiving, and it's making sure that they fully understand those benefits, because without that it's going to make everyone's job a whole lot harder. Um, and with both of those things comes a focus on building out G2s and getting those testimonials and referrals, to make sure we can continue that sort of organic growth across a client base. But I think for us, it's going to be working at a slightly more enterprise and strategic level moving forward across that portfolio, leveraging different stakeholders across our clients and internally, and then making sure that our growth, our numbers continue to grow whilst hopefully retaining clients as much as possible.
Awesome, awesome. Well, we are at the top of the hour. Before we sign off, let everybody know where they can find you, George.
Yeah, so George Holman on LinkedIn, obviously head of growth and strategy at Selligence. The platform is www.selligence.com, and that's where you can get a bit of insight as to the case studies and some of the core benefits of the product.
Awesome, awesome. George, this has been great. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you have a great rest of the day. We'll be back next week with our next episode.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Jason. Great to talk to you.